Archimedes, who might or might not have existed, wrote, he didn't just say this wasn't reported by somebody else, this was in his papers, give me a place to stand on and I will move the earth. Now, if I'm moving a flagstone, I'm going to need a lever to move that flagstone, okay? But if I'm on a sphere and I'm saying place me somewhere else on some other sphere and have some other pivot points against which I can place the lever, it makes this sentence nonsensical. The reason I say this is this demonstrates that Archimedes was a flat earther, because he said, give me a place to stand on wherever outside of the earth and a big enough lever and I will move the earth. There isn't a logical conclusion that can be arrived at where he would say that statement and it not be flat.
All right, just let me respond to that one quickly. So, did Archimedes speak English?
No, Latin.
All right then, so what is the oldest text, the oldest extant text that we have from Archimedes in Latin?
Ooh, would you like me to look it up?
It won't be more than a couple hundred years old, and what you're going to find if you take the time to look into where are the primary source documentations for all of these characters, whether it's Pythagoras, Archimedes, Ptolemy, any of these people, what you're going to find is that we don't have any extant works of theirs more than a couple hundred years old. And anybody who's read George Orwell's 1984 will be familiar with this idea that history can be rewritten as we're going. And this is, I've said to people before, the flat earth thing is fascinating to look into, guys. I was the original ball-less skeptic. I coined the term, okay? Looking into flat earth theory and questioning heliocentrism, it's fascinating, it's eye-opening, it's a lot of fun, okay? But eventually you realize this is child's play compared to some of the other things that are worth looking into, such as the fact that all of these characters, including Archimedes, they're fictional, they're make-believe. We've got no more evidence that they existed than we have that Jesus Christ existed. No offense to the people who believe that Jesus Christ existed, which maybe he did, but we've got no proof of it. The oldest extant works we have of all of these characters is at best a few hundred years old. And if you want to believe the accounts of someone who came 1,000, 1,500 years after the character they're writing about, fine, believe their accounts. To me, it's insane. It's insanity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I totally agree. In fact, I think Eratosthenes was a collage of different people. But with Archimedes, yeah, true, he could be a collage of different people with different discoveries. But the claim that the oldest existing papers on Archimedes by supposedly Archimedes are only hundreds of years old. They weren't written on paper, which decays, as we know, over a period of only a couple of hundred years. They were written on hemp, and hemp lasts much, much longer. Okay, so especially hemp paper or papyrus that was created back at the time, which was a mixture of different elements that don't have the same chemical decay as the paper we have today. So there are parchments and there are writings that are thousands of years old, not just from, we have this Western-centric idea of the world, but we have writings in India which are written on their version of papyrus, which are thousands of years old. And we have other documents that are not about Archimedes that are thousands of years old. In fact, we have Roman records of the time, and they're thousands of years old, that still exist. Now, if you're saying to me, have you seen them yourself? My answer is no. But the truth is, I have never seen the Sahara Desert either. That doesn't mean that because I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist.
No, I agree with you. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's not my argument here. My next question for you is, you say these documents or this hemp is thousands of years old. Okay, great. Who dated it and how?
Yes, so that's a really good point. So all that's needed is for those documents to demonstrate elements like calligraphy and how calligraphy has changed over the years. Now you can say, there's very good forgers that can do this. You know, they can back engineer the calligraphy of the time. The same with, I mean, it's not, we're talking not the same antiquity, but Da Vinci and Da Vinci's writings. So we do have things that were created by people that are hundreds of years old. How old is the oldest thing that was written on something movable like parchment? That's a really good inquiry. I can't
Hey,
answer
Antonio,
it.
Antonio,
Yeah.
I've got this bone, and it's 66 million years old. Would you believe
Yes.
that, right? I found it when I was
Yes.
out digging,
Yes.
right? I just
Not at
happened to
all.
be out digging.
Yes.
Would you know, by coincidence, I happen to be an archaeologist, right, or a paleontologist? Would
Yes.
you believe it? I just
No.
found this 66 million year old bone,
No.
and now I'm in all of the academic journals. And if you want to question how I dated that bone, what are you, a cynic or something?
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
see where I'm going with this?
I completely. Just because somebody says that something is a certain age, it's like, okay, how have you dated it? Carbon dating is only measure a certain amount of the carbon-14 element. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Your query about antiquity, but there are other works that can show elements of antiquity. For instance, paintings. There are paintings, cave paintings. Now, people say, oh, these are hundreds of thousands of years old. I say, oh, well, that's longer than our given history says. That, caveman was there 12,000 years ago. What do you mean? Carbon dating, it's all nonsense. But there are elements that are true. For instance, how society, how communities are built on top of others. So, for instance, in the UK, in London, we have the actual foundations of the Roman Londinium way back when, but it's hundreds of meters below what we now call London. So there were people thousands of years ago building in the UK can be demonstrated because of what they built. Now, if what they built also contains written elements that later confer, say, Archimedes or Julius Caesar, then we can pretty much conclude that Archimedes or Julius Caesar did exist, rather than it be a fantasy of some stonemason back in the day. So there are certain elements that...
Can I just respond to that, though?
Sure.
Can I just respond to that, though, mate? Like, you're saying that you know that this town was built thousands of years ago. Again, we've got the issue of how do you know that? And I'm putting to you, and I hope all of the listeners go out and try and debunk John Le Bon. I put to you that if you look into the source, the primary source evidence for anyone from history, you're going to find it doesn't go back more than a few hundred years. So with that being the case, how can we say that anything is thousands of years old? It might be thousands of years old, but if we're going to believe it, we should have substantiating evidence, enough evidence to corroborate it. And it's going to blow your mind. I'll give you another example, Plato, right? Because the idea is, suppose in 100 years they find the diary of Antonio Subirats, right? And it's a fascinating diary. Once a week he wrote about his new artwork, his new flat earth debates, blah, blah, blah. Right, primary source, okay? If we accept that that's your diary, then that's probably the best account that we're going to get of your life, right? But then we might say, hey, he's making some crazy claims. He claims that he lifted a 200-pound stone. Even though it's his diary, we better check with other sources. We find that Nathan Oakley, in his diary of the same date, I met a man today, he lifted a 200-pound stone. So they're starting to build up evidence that might suggest that your stories are true, okay? You need corroborating claims from other people. That's how we're meant to build up an evidence base for a story of history. This is the historical method. What you're going to find is that when you look into people like Plato, they all go back to one or two sources from a couple hundred years ago. All of them. They're all make-believe characters, my friend. So when you say that a town was built a couple thousand years ago, I say maybe it was, but what's your evidence? And if you're being honest, you don't have any. Now, that might be because it exists and you just haven't looked into it yet. That's fine. But if you look into it, I'm willing to bet any amount of money you're going to find there's no primary evidence from that time that we can prove is from that time. It's that simple. And to me, that is way more interesting than the shape of the Earth. And I know that many of the listeners are like, no, the shape of the Earth is the most important thing. Maybe it is. It was to me a year ago, but then I moved on. I'll give you an example. Eratosthenes, okay? Eratosthenes did not prove the circumference of the Earth, okay? For two reasons. Firstly, the alleged method that he did it, he wasn't even on the same longitude, right? You look at the cities of Alexandria and the other one he was supposedly at, they're on different longitudes. So even if he existed, there's no way that he proved the circumference of the Earth using sticks and shadows, among other reasons, right? But that's not why Eratosthenes didn't prove the circumference of the Earth. The dude did not exist. We cannot prove that he existed. I should watch my words there. Maybe he existed, we just can't prove it. But to me, if you can't prove he existed, then there's a good chance he's just a fictional make-believe character, okay? To me, what's more interesting about Eratosthenes isn't that he didn't prove that the Earth is a certain circumference. What's interesting is he's passed off as being a real figure of history when you can't actually prove that he existed at the time we thought he existed. You see what I'm trying to say here? And this is one of the...
I love the point you're making, John. Sorry I don't mean to hijack it, but I love it. I have these books here, Diogenes Laercio. I've actually made videos. I'm in a running battle with one of my globalist friends who says he was real and there's proof. And these books are two of the oldest books, not these physical ones, but the original ones, with the preeminent philosophers of Greece. And Eratosthenes was a philosopher, and he's not listed in these. There's no listing for Eratosthenes whatsoever. It does say, according to Eratosthenes, this person, because Eratosthenes apparently compiled his own book on the illustrious lives of the Greek philosophers, but it's all a reference according to Eratosthenes, but no mention of Eratosthenes himself being a philosopher or having measured anything, doing any cartography, nothing whatsoever in these. None at all. Just a reference to a person called Eratosthenes, a librarian at Alexandria. And whether the university or the Library of Alexandria was real or not is also a moot point.
Right, I'm going to interrupt you guys at this stage and say, at this point, I'd like you both, because we're still very much on flat Earth, but to bring it to fine points.
All right, okay.
Round out your arguments, summarise your points, and then we'll thank the viewers. I think everyone in the chat will agree it's been the most polite and civil debate ever, so fantastic. Yeah. But yes, if you keep it on topic and round out your, is it flat or is it not flat in the case of the JLB,